In many cases, I believe that insulin resistance is truly the beginnings of a imbalance in hormones, starting with elevated estrogen and low progesterone. And we see that in females, and this is where we start seeing a lot of these females' diseases coming from. Endometriosis to adenomyosis to even PCOS to even like a pelvic inflammatory type of reaction. They're all stemming from something quite similar. We are living in a world where we have seen hormone levels dropping since the 1960s. At the very least, we've seen that clearly from testosterone. What we have seen increase is the abundant and ubiquitous xenoestrogens, right? These fake estrogens that are put in all sorts of these, chemical, plastics and phthalates and BPA, all these nasty things are everywhere, right? These microplastics, we call them. They're in our food, they're in our water, they're in our clothing. And so at this point, they're rather inescapable. You were exposed to them in utero, literally within the womb of your mother. Your mother was likely exposed to them as well, depending on your age. Your kids and their kids, your grandkids will be exposed, and it's at higher and higher levels each generation, right? We're also seeing that to be true too. And so what happens when we're exposed to tremendous amounts of these xenoestrogens? Well, they hit on these estrogen receptors, but at varying degrees of intensity and frequency, right? So they can literally create a mountain out of a molehill. Estrogen as a whole, as an umbrella, and estradiol being the major metabolite, is so potent. It's really, in my opinion, it's kind of a primordial hormone, right? It's like the beginnings of hormones. Estradiol was one of them. We see that across vertebrates in general. Why? Because estradiol is a growth hormone. It actually tells our primordial cells within our own bodies to grow and differentiate, right? Become this or become that. It's such an incredible molecule. It deserves a lot of reverence. And we need that, right? So we need estradiol to help us grow our bones, to help us grow our brains and nervous system and our heart and cardiovascular, system, and protect us from inflammation in many ways, protect our mitochondrial function, but only to a certain degree. The counterbalance to estrogen and estradiol is largely, for both men and women to some degree, is something called progesterone, right? If estradiol is grow and stimulate and excitatory, right? Literally, that's what estradiol does and estrogen does. It makes us grow and feel literally excited, right? Stimulate us. That's where we get a lot of the libido and antidepressant types of stuff from, cognitive function. Well, progesterone is the yin to the yang there, right? Progesterone is calm, relax, take it easy, stop growing, right? So in females, what does estrogen and estradiol do? It helps females grow their endometrial lining, right? Month after month after month. It helps grow a baby, a fetus, right? Estradiol does all those amazing things. Progesterone tells it to stop, right? Don't grow this endometrial lining too thick, dude. Don't enhance the size and shape and quantity of what would be like a polycystic ovarian, quote unquote, cyst or tumor even, right? So we can see where estrogens kind of push the limits there. We have too much growth. We get into these really odd things like endometrial stripes, endometriosis, inflammation in the pelvic region, polycystic ovaries, and then moving towards things like, God forbid, tumors and cancers. Progesterone is anti practically all of that. Again, this is the yin and the yang. We need a little bit of both. Well, we live in a world in which women, young women especially, generally 99% of them, produce tremendous amounts of estrogen throughout their young adult lives. That's the whole point of being a female to some degree. Men do too, by the way. But at some point, if we start having estrogen levels rising up and dropping down and progesterone rising up and dropping down, at some point, if we then compound the effect with these things like microplastics and xenoestrogens, these chemicals found in our hygiene products and food and clothing and water and all the things I described earlier. Well, now we have almost think about it like a doubling or perhaps even a tripling or quadrupling effect on our male and female estrogens at large. So we have now more relative estrogen, quote unquote, even though they're not really estrogens, than we do something like progesterone. And in fact, the more estrogen we have, the relative drop of progesterone is going to accumulate dramatically. Those estrogens are also going to stimulate glucocorticoid receptors. Literally, it's going to stimulate more like cortisol production and norepinephrine and adrenaline and all those things, which then put us at more risk of that kind of flight or fight response, right? We have a little bit more of that sympathetic nervous system rush. And if we don't leave that, we're going to start having a hampering on our thyroid, which is then going to impact our ovaries and their production and the steroidogenesis production of other hormones. And specifically, that could be progesterone. So now if you can kind of picture this, we're having this spiraling down effect where we start with very high estrogen levels, and it starts impacting various regions of the male and female body all the way down to something like progesterone. And in the meanwhile, that estrogen or xenoestrogen is going to stimulate those glucocorticoid receptors to mess with our adrenal glands, to mess with our cortisol, which is going to jack up our blood sugars, which is then going to lead to what? Something like insulin resistance, right? Insulin resistance absolutely can come from a poor diet and lifestyle. No, there's no question. Okay. I'm not disparaging anybody who would say that's true. But in many cases, I believe that insulin resistance is truly the beginnings of a imbalance in hormones, starting with elevated estrogen and low progesterone. And we see that in females, and this is where we start seeing a lot of these females' diseases coming from. And they're really all coming from a similar thing. They're just being affected differently, right? So endometriosis to adenomyosis to even PCOS to even like a pelvic inflammatory type of reaction. They're all stemming from something quite similar. And so the reason I'm going so deep here, guys, is because these are the things I want you to start unraveling and understanding. When you start picturing these things and recognizing them at a foundational level, we can then not only treat our female patients who are maybe a little bit more straightforward, right? Our patients in menopause who are otherwise well and good, and they just need a little bit of hormone help, to our females who have and suffer from things like PCOS or endometriosis or infertility. We can start utilizing hormones for them and better yet, have an understanding of what actually needs to be applied and what things do we need to watch out for so we don't turn this into a situation where things are bad and now they're worse. We'll reverse it, right? We'll have a bad situation, make it great. And it gets better over time. Thank you so much for checking out this clip and tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. If you really liked it, I definitely recommend that you click here to watch the whole entire video where I go into much more detail. Thank you again for joining, and I'll see you there.